Introducing our special guest speaker for today, Tom Leveen. Tom is an accomplished, award-winning young adult author of numerous wonderful and thrilling teen reads full of art, punk rock, first loves, and the savageness of youth. His book, Hell World, was a finalist for the Bram Stoker Award. Zero is 2013's #1 Yalsa Book of the Year. And my personal favorite, Sick, earned both the Westchester Fiction Award and the Grand Canyon Reader Award. Tom is originally from our very own Phoenix, Arizona, and started handing stories down from our public library system until he decided it was time to tell his own. He has authored and collaborated on over 19 published books and wrote the comic book series Spawn with Todd McFarlane, and is currently writing fiction for the tabletop war game Battletech. He has a number of interests and experiences that I implore you to ask about if given the chance, like playing in a band or two, learning a number of martial arts styles, and even hosting a public access television show. Tom, we are so happy to have you here and with us today. And with that introduction, I will turn the spotlight over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Wendy. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And thank all of you for tuning in. This is going to be great. This is one of the most favorite things I get to do, is hang out with people like you and talk about writing and books and publishing and storytelling and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have anything really to add to my introduction. Emily did a wonderful job. Thank you very much for that, Emily. And so before we even do anything at all, I know we should have access, you should have access to our chat room. So if you could just really quick say hi, say hello, say what's up, say something in the chat so I can make sure that that's working, because this is really your time more than it is mine. You showed up today because you had a question or an idea or something that you're working on that you wanted some help with, maybe. It could be a really big, broad question like, how do I publish a book? Or how do I get an agent? Or it could be a really specific question about something that you are writing right now. Whatever those questions are, I want you to please, absolutely, feel free to put those in the Q&A right now or at any time during our time together. Whether it's on topic, off topic, not to worry. If it's something off topic, we'll come back to it maybe towards the end. But this is your time, and I want to give you as many great answers and guidance as I possibly can while we're here. So please feel free to do that. And there's Emily in there. So I see Emily in the webinar chat. That's good. Yay. Thanks, Emily. So that's working anyway. We've got that going on. In the absence of any pressing questions, the main thing we're going to kind of focus on today is we're going to write a book, because that's what we're here to do, right? We're going to write a whole book today. Okay, maybe not an entire book, but we can absolutely get one started, because the things that we need to be thinking about while planning a book or while thinking about a story, these exercises and things we're going to do today are going to be applicable across genres, across platforms, and across formats. As a matter of fact, on that note, I want to make sure you all have one of these, right? You have some kind of device, mobile device, cell phone, whatever it is that you call it. You probably, statistically speaking, you have one of these. It's either in your pocket or by your side. It's within reach almost certainly right now, right? Okay. One of the things I wanted to make sure and talk about before we even get into the whole storytelling thing is, if you have one of these or something like it or access to it, there is absolutely no reason for you to not get your story out to people, basically for free. Now you got to get the phone and, whatever your service fee is and all that kind of stuff. But after that, your phone comes preloaded with everything you need to record an audiobook, to write a novel. You can even dictate a novel and have it do text to speech, or excuse me, speech to text, right? Things like that. You can access platforms like Amazon, YouTube, TikTok, you name it. All these platforms, which are 100% free to post on. YouTube, whatever. I'm sure, I'm positive, whatever brought you here today, you have a story to tell. I absolutely believe that. I know that because every person on earth has a story to tell, whether it's a true story of something that happened to them, or it's a fictional story, something that you made up. You have a story to tell, and I promise you, there are a whole lot of people out there who want and need to read or hear or see that story. And I just want you to be thinking about that today. And in fact, I want you to be thinking about it for the rest of your life, because it's just true. We all need to share our stories. And the things we'll be talking about again today will be applicable across those platforms. If you were thinking about, well, I want to do videos or movies, cool. This work we're going to do on character stuff is going to help you. If you're thinking, yeah, I absolutely want to write a 7-book fantasy series, great. We can work on how the best way to go about that is. If you wanted to do short form videos, if you wanted to write screenplays or stage plays or do a comic book, I'm learning how to do that all over again myself right now. All of these things are entirely possible, and there's absolutely no reason for you to not do them. Okay, so I just want to make sure and say that we'll maybe talk about that a little bit more as time goes on. So, okay, I got my Q&A up here. Oh, and we've got questions. Cool. So this is cool. I'm just going to jump in and start answering those, and then I'll come back to my notes if I need to. But for right now, you guys are here asking questions, so let's jump in and ask questions. So first question up on my magic board here is, how do you get started on a good novel? Great question. What type of brainstorming should you do? Excellent questions. So let's talk about that. How do you get started on a good novel? The first thing you need is an idea, right? And that's actually one of the questions a lot of authors get is, where do you get your ideas from? One of the other takeaways that I want you to take away from today's session is, no matter how old or young you are or feel, I need you to get out of your house. I need you to go exploring. I need you to go do things. I need you to travel as much as you can. Now, maybe you're like 8 years old and you're like, I have a bike, and that's it. Cool, man. Get on your bike, go check stuff out. Or maybe you're really, really like ancient, like Dr. Blasingame at ASU is. I mean, he is so old. He's like Yoda. But even Dr. B needs to get out of the house. Dr. B's got to get out and go find new things and explore things and try things. Why? So that you have things to write about. A lot of people who are younger, like I was when I started, we go to school and then we come home and we lock ourselves in our little writing space and we just write and write and write and write and write and write. And that's cool. And I'm glad. I don't want you to stop doing that. But you also have to get out of that space and go experience things so that you get new and cool ideas. And then I suggest you write those ideas down. So that's number one. Where to get your ideas? Out in the world. You have to see and experience things. Getting started on a good novel, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is what I would, where do I want to start? I want you to start thinking about genre and category. Those are two different things. Genre is the signs you're going to see at your local library or at Barnes & Noble or your local independent bookstore like Changing Hands or Poison Pen, both of which you should go to, by the way. Those signs above the bookshelves are genre. When we talk about genre, we're talking the big categories like mystery, science fiction, horror, fiction, romance, that's genre. You need to be thinking in those terms. What genre is my novel going to be? You don't have to get married to it. You can change your mind later, but be thinking about where in those spaces would you find your book shelved. That's different than category. Category is more of a new thing that's come up ever since the advent of Amazon.com. Category are those really long, ridiculous, quote unquote, genres that you'll see. There's usually 3 of them listed in a book listing. That's like fiction, ebook, children's, young adult, fantasy, romance with friend. Like, it's just this long thing that keeps going on and on and on. That's a category. You do want to be thinking about those categories, but don't worry about it right now. You can slide that into a category when it's time to either publish on Amazon directly or when you're working with your publisher if you're doing the traditional route. But be thinking about where those things are going to go. This is a part now that a lot of people, strangely enough, miss about getting started with their novel. You have to have a protagonist, and the protagonist is also just another big name for main character, right? Your protagonist has to want something. That's it. They have to want something. Then your job is to put obstacles in their way. Your job is to have an antagonist or an opposition that's going to try to thwart them every step of the way. That is how you build any story, whether that's a 10-page comic book or a 2-hour movie or a 70,000-word novel. Those are the main things you absolutely must have. Best example is this. Open up your book and you say, I woke up, got dressed, walked to the store, bought some milk, and came home. The end. That's not a story. Nothing went wrong. For a story, something has to go wrong. The better story, or an actual story, would be, I got up, got dressed, went to the store, bought some milk, ninjas attacked. Okay, now we've got a story, because ninjas are a force, right? That are in opposition. They must want something from you. So we got to take care of the ninjas. Make sure your story has a protagonist who wants something and is being thwarted or stopped as frequently as possible. So I hope that makes sense. If anything doesn't make sense, make sure you put it in the chat or in the Q&A so that I can come back to it again. But that's something I see missing quite a lot. It's a series of events as opposed to a plot, which is something going wrong. Okay. Remind me to tell you a great story about the Hunger Games when we come back to that. A sort of shorthand, you might want to write this down. A shorthand way of kind of encapsulating that is the following sentence, and you will fill in these blanks. All Joe, your main character, all Joe wanted was blank. But blank wouldn't let him, period. That's it. Fill in those blanks, okay? All Luke Skywalker wanted was to, defeat the Empire, but Darth Vader wouldn't let him. That's it. Just fill in those blanks, and that's going to give you an idea of, does your story have conflict? Because that's what we're after. We want conflict to get that story started. In terms of the brainstorming, should you do, now we're getting into the topic of pantsers, P-A-N-T-S-E-R, pantsers versus plotters. A pantser is someone who writes by the seat of their pants. They sit down like, I don't know what's going to happen next, and they just start writing. A plotter is somebody who is going to use an outlining system. For example, there's Save the Cat Writes a Novel, The Hero's Journey, the Snowflake Method, story engines, and there's probably half a dozen other outlining type things that some writers use. Some people swear by them. I will not tell you what to do. I won't dictate to you or prescribe for you what the best choice is. Follow your own instinct. What I have found works for me is I will start as a pantser. I'm just going to write and see what kind of happens. And after 20 pages, 50 pages, sometimes even more, I will then take one of my favorite outlining processes and kind of overlay it on the story and see if the structure is working, if that makes sense. So those are some options. The brainstorming part, the brainstorming part is the fun part, right? That's where all the creativity happens and all the fun stuff goes on. So again, I don't want to be prescriptive for that. Whatever works for you, you should trust that the story will be there. I hope that answers your question about brainstorming. If it doesn't, give me a poke in the next question and let me know. Okay, next question is, how do you know how to categorize your book if the topics are too mature for youth or teen genres? Oh, this is going to be fun. Is adult fiction limited to only adult writers? Fantastic question. Okay, I'm going to get some water. That's a good one. So, how to categorize your book if the topics are too mature for youth or teen? Funny thing about youth, or about YA in particular, there's some bleed into middle grade, but not too much. Let's first talk about that. As far as I'm concerned, when we're talking about those categories, those genres, we have children's picture book, okay, this is not a question about that. You have sort of early readers or chapter books where you have the really big typeface and font, usually still some illustrations. Then you have middle grade, which is less likely to have illustrations. It's more of a regular size font, smaller, shorter stories. And then you've got YA, which is everything after that, kind of that roughly 13 to 18 span. The main difference between, we're not going to do picture book or chapter book. That's not my forte. I can tell you what I know about them, but that's not what I've published in. Middle grade tends to be a story in which the main character, the protagonist, and this is broadly speaking, broad brush here, the main character does not break away from the family. Okay. And I don't mean in like a bad way or anything like that. I just mean in like a growth sort of way, personal development way, if you will. Whereas YA, almost always there is some sense of breaking away from family, growing up. There's more change, there's more shift in young adults than there tends to be in middle grade. Again, really broad brush. So please don't feel like that it applies to absolutely everything. But the question here about the topics is an interesting one. Really, really interesting. To my way of thinking, and based on the books I have published and that I have read over the last couple of decades, there isn't a topic that is too mature for young adults. The handling of that topic may very well be too much, okay? So first of all, let's start with violence. There are some super, super violent YA books out there. Hunger Games, anybody read that? Y'all heard of that story? Yeah, what's that about? Oh, it's about this young teenage girl who gets thrown into a game where everyone fights to the death. Totally cool, wins all the awards, everyone loves it, right? So violence as a topic, for example, like that's all over YA literature. I'm sure you can find some in middle grade too, but it would be upper middle grade, more in that junior high kind of level. So that's a difficult topic, but how is it handled? Now, Stephen King, let's say, could take that same topic very quickly and say, I'm going to write a novel about a teenage girl who has to fight to the death in an arena scenario. And his handling, his tone of that same exact topic is going to be very different than it was handled in the Hunger Games, right? So when we talk about these topics, difficult topics or mature topics, it really comes down to how they are discussed. How are they handled? And I'm not going to go into great detail here, but if we're talking about intimacy in young adult, there you can find a wide variety of physical, intimate things that happen or are discussed in YA. But again, how those are handled is very different than how you're going to find them in like an adult romance or just an adult fiction. You're not going to see it in middle grade. Dr. B, if you're in here, there he is. You can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but when we talk about the physical intimacy, you will not see that in middle grade at all. Like you can maybe get away with holding hands. That's about where most librarians and teachers and parents are going to cut you off, and therefore publishers and editors will cut you off at about that level. YA, you have a lot more freedom, but you don't generally want, I think the romance novelist's term is steamy. We don't do steamy physical intimacy in YA. And if we do, there are consequences. There are very real world things that occur as a result of that kind of thing. So it's handled, it's not misleading. We definitely don't want to be misleading in that. Writing YA and middle grade and any children's genre is an enormous responsibility. It's also super fun. But it really is a very, very serious responsibility. And we as authors need to remember that. So you don't want to push those boundaries too hard in the description, in the actual, this is what happens in the story. I will not read it, but my novel Zero has one such scene, and it's about as physically intimate as you can get. Leave it at that. But it is not steamy. It is not something that you go, all right, like, no, it's quite the opposite. And there are a number of other stories that do the same thing. So yeah, tonally very, very different. I hope I'm answering your question. If I'm not, please let me know in the comments in the Q&A. And then the other part of the question, is adult fiction limited to only adult writers? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like I wouldn't broadcast, if you're 12 and you're writing, you're writing an adult genre, I might not broadcast that if I was trying to get an agent, for example, a literary agent, or sell to an editor. I might keep that to myself. But like legally, no. The only thing, to that point, is adult fiction limited only to adult writers. Legally, you can absolutely write and publish anything you want to at any age. However, And this is another little side trip we need to take. If you want to be paid for it, if you want to sign with a literary agent or go to a big five or big four now, whatever, traditional publisher, or sell on Amazon, for example, well, you do need a credit card and you do need a bank account and things like that. So there are behind the scenes business things that you need to be thinking about if you're under 18, let's say. But in terms of allowed to, yeah, you write whatever you want. And just as long as you, the author, know where it gets shelved, that's the important part. So before I go on to the next question, which I'm going to do, I might be answering this question. One of the other things I want you to be thinking about and never ever forget is that the moment, the instant you think or believe someone should give you money for writing fiction, you have become a small business owner. Notice I don't say if you've written a book or you've published a book. I mean, way before we even get to that point. If you feel like you should be paid for writing fiction, and you should be, by the way, you have started a small business. You are a small business owner. You now have to wear two different hats. You have to have the creative hat and my pantser hat, and I'm going to go and write my 7-part epic fantasy story. Cool. You also need to then switch hats and be thinking about things like your business and marketing and taxes and banking and like all that kind of stuff, which is not the focus of today's discussion. We can certainly get into that more if you want to. I just want you to be aware of that way up front. I have just saved you 10 years of heartache because I've warned you ahead that this is how it works. This applies whether you want to be traditionally published like a Random House, Simon & Schuster, or you want to do independent publishing and just go to Amazon, Draft to Digital, these other kind of platforms. That's just the reality. You need to be aware that you are starting a business. Okay, so sidebar on that note. So yeah, back to our adult fiction, limited to only adult writers. No, I hope I've answered that question. Again, if you need clarification, just drop it back in the questions again. So cool. I'm so glad you guys are engaging. This is so much more fun than anything I would have done on my own. Okay, next question. How would you recommend going about publishing? Oh, my friend, you've opened such a can of worms and I love it. That's a big question. And I'm going to make some assumptions about the nature of the question to get started. You have basically, you have two methods available to us. One is to do traditional publishing. Traditional publishing means you finish a novel, revise it, make it as good as you can possibly make it. You then create a query letter, which you send off to literary agents, and in the hopes of having someone who will offer representation. If that happens, that agent will then take your book and pitch it to other publishers and imprints who hopefully will buy it. You will get an advance with any luck. And then hopefully after the book sells 1 trillion copies, you'll get royalties, which is great. Whole other topic. And you'll be in bookstores like Barnes & Noble. That's track 1. Track 2 is independent publishing, sometimes called self-publishing. I stick with independent now. That's generally the kind of accepted term, I think. This is where you, again, finish a book, revise it, edit it, make it as polished as you possibly can. And then you basically, for all intents and purposes, post it to a site like Amazon or a site like Draft to Digital. That's draft number 2 digital, which covers everything Amazon doesn't. And there's a few other ones that escape me at the moment. But anyway, and you do that yourself. Now, here's the thing. To publish on something like, we'll just use Amazon for right now as an example. To publish on Amazon costs you nothing. Like, you can write your book, format it yourself, make your own book cover. I don't recommend it, but you can make your own book cover and upload it to Amazon and let it sit there and see what happens. It probably won't do much. You probably have to do some kind of advertising, get on some newsletter swaps, right? Build an email list, things like that. Here's the key. Here's the trick on either of those courses. Neither one is better than the other. Neither one is worth more than the other. And in both of them, almost certainly, you still need to build an email list, do your own marketing. The advantage of traditional publishing is, yes, they will get into bookstores. If you go independent, the likelihood of getting into bookstores across the nation are very, very low. It happens, but it's really unlikely. You might get into some local stores, but that's about it. But in either direction, you need to assume that you will have to be doing the bulk of your own marketing, whether that's paid advertising or, again, newsletter swaps, things like that. And that's something that a lot of apprentice writers, apprentice authors are not told in advance. So thank you for asking that, because I always want to make sure and emphasize that kind of situation. Now, the question is, how would I recommend going about publishing? Okay, so so many answers to this question. I straddle the fence, which is sometimes called hybrid. There are some advantages to traditional publishing that for me, and I'm going to be honest here, completely, honest with you. For me, it's ego. And I don't mean ego in a bad way. I mean that I still crave some gatekeeper somewhere saying, yes, Tom, you're good enough. I don't know why. I wish I didn't feel that way, but I still do. Again, there are certain advantages that come with being a traditionally published author. Getting invited to do things, getting invited to come to conferences and conventions and things like that is a big part of it. I love doing that. I love the doors that open with that, okay? If we're talking about, I just want to write fiction and make a living, then your best bet is to go independent and write series. That's the reality right now. And when I say series, there's actually, if you haven't heard of it, Google 20 books to 50K. It's a whole sort of group / program that you can join that's all about writing a series or multiple series independently, and how the math breaks down, how many books you need to basically print or publish on a site like Amazon to make a living. And it's not as much as you might think. I'm a big fan of the theory or idea. I always forget the guy's name, Kevin something. I can't remember now. But anyway, it's called 1,000 True Fans. Do this math. If you have 1,000 people willing to part with, if you write, let's say, a novel every month, you're putting out a novel or so every month, that's maybe $4.99. We'll round it up to $5, right? If you're able to create a backlog of enough books that 1,000 people will give you $5 a month for those books, that's $5,000 a month. That's not bad. That's, if it's not a living, it's really close, right? Depending on your lifestyle, okay? 1,000 people is nothing. Nothing. And again, you can do it all on this if you really want to. So do I have a recommendation? I don't. But I will tell you this, and I was going to bring this up later anyway, so now's as good a time as any. What I really want you to do, all of you, I don't care if you're 8 or 80, I want you to take yourself out somewhere for donuts, coffee, something stronger, whatever makes you happy, okay? And this can be in your room, it can be in your kitchen, but you need to be by yourself or wherever. Maybe it's a walk in the park. I need you to go somewhere and do something where you are in deepest connection with yourself, where you can have an honest conversation with you, okay? Whatever that means for you, wherever that means. Take yourself to that place and ask yourself, no kidding, no one's judging you, what do I want? What do I want out of this? When I started, when I got my first literary agent, no exaggeration, my goal was, man, I want to walk into Changing Hands bookstore in Tempe and see a book that I wrote on the shelf. That'd be awesome. That was it. I didn't know anything about royalties or advances or marketing or anything else. I just wanted to see something I wrote on the store at a cool place like Changing Hands or Poison Pen. And I got that, and it was awesome. Now, a lot of other things happened as a result of that nobody warned me about, which is why I'm so glad you're here today so I can tell you about these things. Because now things have changed. That was only, 12 years ago is when Party came out. My first novel came out, so that's not that long ago. Things have changed enormously just in that amount of time. If in your walk in the park or your glass of wine or your cup of coffee, whatever, you're like, I want to make $100,000 a month on Kindle writing romance. Cool. That's fine. Own it, but be honest about it. Tell yourself, yeah, that's what I really am after. I'm just after the money because I hate my cubicle job or whatever. That's legitimate, and I don't want anybody to think that it's not, because it is. But you have to know that, because to go back to your question, how would I recommend going about publishing? It depends on what you want. If you just want the shiny book at the bookstore, you're going to have to go traditional. You're going to have to write a certain type of book, get it to a certain type of literary agent, and get it to a certain type of publisher. That's how you do that. If you're about the money or the fans, or you just want to write whatever you want without anybody, getting in your way, then you need to go independent. So that was a super long answer to what appeared to be a very simple question. So once again, since I can't see you, I hope that answered your question. And if I didn't, please rephrase it or ask a follow-up in the Q&A, and I will come back to it. I will tell you this, before we move on. My theory and kind of favorite way to do things right now is the following, and this is a whole other topic that we probably don't have time to get into, but we'll see where the day goes. Write your book. So here's what I would do. Here's what I would do for me. I would write a book, write it the best I possibly can. I would have fun. Oh my gosh, if you're not having fun, why on earth are you doing it? So I would have fun writing my book for me. That's it. We start with that. I would revise that book. I would edit that book until it was the best it could possibly be. I would make sure and get some good beta readers in there, people to, editors or whatever, to go over it, make sure the content is good, make sure there's no spelling errors, et cetera, et cetera. And then I would take that book to Kickstarter. And I would be looking very seriously at how Brandon Sanderson raised $41 million on Kickstarter. $41 million on Kickstarter. Kickstarter is quickly becoming the go-to place for writers, because they're starting to see that they can build a small but fanatical, loyal community who wants to read their stuff. Big fan of Kickstarter. I would take it to Kickstarter, I would kickstart that book, and I would use that to recoup any costs that I spent up front for my cover design, layout, editing, things like that. Then I would go to Amazon. I would do that for 3 months, which is, if I'm not mistaken, is still the length of time you can be in Kindle Unlimited. Then after that 3 months, I would go what's called wide, which means everybody besides Amazon. I would use Draft to Digital for that, and I would make it a series. And I would make the first book free. I would get that free book out in front of as many people as I could with newsletter swaps, and then be busy writing the rest of my series or starting a new one. That is what I would do. That is what I am doing. In the meantime, I'm also working on something that's going to go to traditional publishers, because I still want that hit. I still want that foot in the door, so to speak, of traditional publishing. So that's what I would do. One-on-one, if we were having coffee, it would depend on what your goals are. And that's why I'm telling you to ask yourself what you really want and be serious about it. That will determine what to do next. So, wow, that was a super long answer. I hope that was helpful. All right, I'm going to take a drink and then we'll move on. World building. Okay, getting into some craft questions here. Any tips on world building? Have you done world building? Yes. One of my favorite worlds that I think I probably built was Hell World, because Hell World takes place, kind of kicks off an apocalypse, a global apocalypse, big Lovecraftian monsters and everything. That was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to do. I did a lot of research for that book to get not only my build up to the apocalypse believable, but then the realities of life after apocalypse as realistic as I possibly could. So that was a lot of fun to do. Tips on world building. If anything, I'm gonna send you to another reference. If you can look up or follow anything that Mike Stackpole writes, Michael Stackpole, has written for Star Wars and several other properties. Wonderful author, really great guy. He's done some work there at ASU in the past, and that's more his thing. Like, he does a lot of fantasy, science fiction type stuff, and has some great resources out there about world building. So I would absolutely look him up. And in terms of my tips, I think the main thing about world building is to remember that your characters are a product of their environment. I was going to do a whole bit on setting here later, but the shorthand is to think of it this way. Hunger Games, cool book, right? Cool story, cool movies. Star Wars, cool movies, cool books, awesome. But Darth Vader doesn't belong in the Hunger Games any more than Katniss belongs in Star Wars, right? Like, you can do it for fun and be a fun experiment, but fundamentally you don't want those two characters to be in each other's worlds because they are products of their environment. So your environment, your world building needs to impact, I would say, your protagonist, your antagonist. It's going to determine a lot about who they are and what their capabilities are. I was going to talk about this a little bit anyway. In English class, in like high school English, you were probably taught, this story is either about man versus man, man versus nature, or man versus himself. To which I and a lot of fiction authors would say, actually, it's all three. A good novel will be about all three. How is the environment, how is the nature part going to get in the way, right? There's our conflict again. How is the nature part going to get in the way of what Luke Skywalker wants? How is his own inner struggle going to get in the way of what he wants? How is the antagonist, the physical bad guy, the villain, going to get in the way of what he wants, right? So as part of that, your world building, I think, has a lot to do with nature, has a lot to do with setting, and making sure that your setting is perhaps not always inhospitable, but from time to time really gets in the way of things. Let the environment attempt to thwart your main character. Any other tips on world building though? Gosh, what else about world building? I probably could, and as soon as this call ends, I'm going to think of 18 things I should have said. That happens every time. But here's one that I actually learned from Mike Stackpole. You don't want I'm trying to remember how he said it. Avoid one-of-a-kind items, I think is the way he put it. Excuse me. And avoid naming things that are the only kind, or being absolute about something. I think the example he gave once a long time ago was all trolls are 15 feet tall. Okay, if you say that in book 1 and then in book 3 you have a 7-foot troll, believe me, your readers are going to write you nasty emails and tweets saying, well, you said trolls were 15 feet. And you're like, I forgot, it was 20 years ago or whatever. So try to avoid absolutes in your world building. You might say something like, all proper trolls are 15 feet tall. Most trolls are 15 feet tall. You see what I'm saying? So do leave a little wiggle room in your world building. You don't want absolutes can come back and bite you later. So I do advise being cautious about that. So again, follow up if I can try to develop that a little bit more for you. But great question. It's fun. And don't let it take over the story, I think, is the other thing. We can do a whole class just on setting and description, but I've seen, and it depends. There are some, particularly in fantasy and some in science fiction, but really fantasy does this a lot, where authors can go on page after page after page of description, and that's cool because fantasy readers tend to enjoy that. That's one of the things they like. That's one of the features they enjoy about fantasy. But man, you got to be good at it. Like if you're in that genre, if you're looking to write these, big door stopper Brandon Sanderson books, I highly encourage you to start studying poetry if you don't already, because poets have ways of putting phrases and words and images together that us mere mortal prose writers don't. Start studying your poetry now and let that inform some of your world building. Let that inform the description of some of your world building. Yeah, I'm going to stop there on world building, but follow up if I didn't answer your question, please. Yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. Somebody named Dr. B is here now. That sounds familiar. Oh, that's right. He's my Yoda. As long as Dr. B's here, I want to say something about that and about Dr. B very quickly. And then we'll get back to some craft things. However old you are, I want you to know this, if you take nothing else away from today. You deserve to do this. I want you to know, today, February 11th, 2023, Tom Leveen gave me permission to want to tell stories and to publish them or to get them out there. You are allowed to do that. Now, it has been my experience, particularly with younger apprentice authors. Sometimes there's family or friends or other people who, for lack of a better term, aren't on board. I understand that. And I'm sorry if that's the case. I'm sorry if you're not surrounded by people who are supportive of you. That's okay. Don't worry about it now. Keep telling your stories, even if you're not putting them out anywhere right now. It's okay. It's fine. But keep telling them. Tell them in secret if you have to. Okay. Keep a file folder under your desk, whatever you have to do. But you do deserve to do this. Every single one of you deserves to tell the stories that you want to tell, however you want to tell them. Okay. I'm lucky, and the reason I bring this up with Dr. B is Dr. B is the ultimate young adult genre guru in at least the United States, if not the world. He knows more about that genre than anyone on earth, and I am so grateful and blessed to have met him and to have studied under him, and to call him my friend and mentor. And having people like that in your corner can really change things. It really, really matters when somebody like that just comes alongside and says, wow, you're really good at this. Wow, you should write more of this. Wow, you should try to publish this. Wow, keep writing, keep going, you know? So yeah, that's all I want to say. Thank you, Dr. B. I love and appreciate you, and you make all of us better. So thank you for that. Okay. How do you go about creating a pen name? Great question. Is it possible to keep yourself anonymous while still interacting with possible fans? So first answer, I don't know for sure because I haven't done it a lot. I've played with it, but I haven't done it. Number two, I'm probably going to do it a lot more. I'm going to delve into my own pen names because I am a storyteller, and one of the things I dislike about traditional publishing is you publish, your first young adult novel, and they're like, great, you're a young adult novelist. I'm like, but I write horror and science fiction, and can I? Nope, you write young adult now. And you're like, I can't ever publish my horror novel. I'm like, not with this publisher. No, you can't. And it's like, so that's one of the things I dislike about traditional publishing is and I understand why they do it. It's a whole marketing thing, and I respect it. I understand why they do it. But it's handcuffing, and I don't want to be handcuffed. I have stories to tell. Damn it, I'm going to tell them, right? So creating one, however, is particularly if you're doing independent, like on Amazon, you can have as many pen names as you want. And it's, a good internet sleuth can probably figure out who you are at some point if they really wanted to. My experience is that most readers really don't care. Like they want to start, particularly if we're talking about Amazon and the Kindle readers, like they just want to inhale their favorite genre, romance, science fiction, military, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, whatever. They're just there for the read. They could care less about whether that's a pen name or not. So you don't need to worry too much about it. Is there a way to keep yourself completely anonymous? I'm not the person to answer that. I'm sure there probably is to some degree, but man, the internet is a big place. And if somebody really, really wanted to track you down, they probably could figure out who you are. I just don't think it's likely. And I don't think it's anything to really worry about. I guarantee you, I don't know the stats because no one would admit it, but I guarantee you, there are people writing steamy romance right now on Kindle who you would never guess were doing it. Guaranteed. And that's fine. Good for them. But in terms of how to do it, yeah, if you're just interested in not using your own name for like professional reasons or something, which is totally cool, you just get started on something like Amazon and you can put in whatever author name you want to, and nobody is going to be the wiser, and probably nobody's going to care. One of the questions, however, that comes up in your second part of the question, interacting with possible fans, then things get a little bit more tricky because I'm a firm believer in the community of readership, which is why so many authors have migrated to TikTok, right? And they're having these very sort of one-on-one conversations with people there, or on Twitter or on Instagram, things like that. Because building that community is huge. Patreon is huge. I know, and I can't even believe it, but there are people writing what I would consider not the best stories in the world who are making a living off of subscription sites like Patreon. Why? Because they are connected to their fans. So I'm a firm believer in community building when it comes to writing and storytelling. How that works if you're using a pen name, I don't have personal experience with that, so I'm not sure. But honestly, I don't see why not. You don't have to be doing what I'm doing, Like there's really no way to hide who Tom Leveen is at this point. Like you Google my name, I'm out there, you know what I look like, you know what I write, you know, all this kind of stuff. So for me to try and write as a pen name that I'm going to keep quiet, I'm not going to use this face, but maybe shouldn't use anyway. I'm not going to lie about it though either. I'm not going to get a fake picture probably. I might even be as upfront as to say, you know, John Smith is the pen name of an author who yada, 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 and just be honest about it that way. But yeah, my impulse is to tell you that generally speaking, it's not a problem and it's nothing to really worry about. So the anonymity is easy enough to do if you start a separate Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, you know, whatever email list, things like that. Just start a separate one from the one that you would use for yourself to kind of to protect your identity that way. But as I close up that question, I would also advise you to remain authentic. You can have a pen name, that's cool. But when interacting with fans, be your authentic self, or at least, you know, your authentic writer self, if that makes sense. I wouldn't be in support of a pen name that is also a completely separate persona or identity. Now you're lying, right? Now you're being disingenuous, and if your fans figure that out, you're done. So pen name is cool, that's fine, but still be yourself. I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. Okay, what are good resources you can use to understand your rights and understand how to negotiate? Or is that only a job that an agent or manager would do? Awesome question. Thank you for asking about the business. Good idea. So generally speaking, broadly speaking, the only time you're going to have to really worry about that is if you're working with a traditional publisher, in which case, yes, your agent, which is probably how you got that publisher, is going to handle a lot of that kind of stuff for sure. The negotiation thing, man, that just gets really dicey. Because I know when I got started, my agent more or less told me, here's the rights that we're giving up. And I was like, yay, because I was just so happy, right? I was, you know, brand new author and I was just ready to say yes to everything. And so I did. Now, flash forward 12, 15 years, and I'm a lot more jaded, which will happen to you also. And you start getting a little bit more into the weeds about that kind of stuff of like, all right, well, like, for example, the next time I sell a book to a traditional publisher, they're just going to ask for everything. That's what they do. Like, we want everything. And I'm going to come back and be like, are you going to do an audiobook? Because it says here in your contract that you get the rights to the audio. Yeah, we get those rights. Cool. When are you going to release that? Well, you know, we got to see. Well, then I want those rights back. Either I want it in writing that you're going to release this audiobook in the next, you know, year from publication, or we're going to sunset clause that thing and I get those rights back immediately. And then you got to go back and forth on that. I see here you have graphic novel rights. I want those back. No. We can't give those up. Are you going to make a comic book? Are you going to make a graphic novel? Well, I don't know. Well, then I want those rights back. See, and it's this back and forth constantly, right? If you're going independent, you should still know what rights you're dealing with. But those are going to be publicly available, like on Amazon, for example. If you're publishing on Kindle, you need to read those terms. For example, if you sign up for Kindle Unlimited as an author, as a publisher, then you cannot publish that book anywhere else. It cannot be available on Royal Road or Wattpad or what have you, or Patreon for that matter. Patreon maybe because it's behind a paywall, but I wouldn't count on it. You're giving Amazon the exclusive right to be on Kindle Unlimited. And furthermore, they're going to automatically re-up you every 3 months unless you go in manually and tell them not to. So those are kinds of, you know, some things just off the top of my head that you have to be thinking about. But short answer, traditional publishing, that's what your agent is for. And your agency should presumably have lawyers and, you know, all that kind of stuff to handle anything that comes up. But that's what the agent's job is definitely to do all that kind of stuff. In terms of resources to understand that kind of thing, I probably do. They're just not on the tip of my tongue right now. Yeah, nothing comes to mind. You might try a website called Absolute Right, WRITE, absoluteright.com, and go to their forums. It's free to join. There are a lot of published authors on there. Mostly it's apprentice writers, but a lot of public, that's how I got started. That's the site that I use to learn how to write query letters, for example. And that's a great place to ask, to at least start poking around, read the threads first, just do a search for like, rights and, negotiations, things like that. You'll get a whole bunch of hits probably that you can read about. And then if you don't have a specific question answered, that's probably a good place to pose those questions, I think. So absoluteright.com, WRITE, and go to their forums. So sorry, I can't give you a better answer on that. I just don't have those other resources. But yeah, but on that note though, before I go to my next question, I have no idea what I ate that's getting stuck in here. Something I want to underscore kind of around that question too about agents, and that is this. Agents are wonderful, and I love my agents, and they've done great work, and got me into Random House and Simon & Schuster and all these great things. They've gotten me tremendous advances and great deals, and thank you very much for that. Super cool. Your agent and your editor, for that matter, your publisher, are not your friends. I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm not bad-mouthing them. I'm not speaking ill of them. I'm telling you, apprentice author, that the relationship you have with a literary agent and an editor and a publisher is a professional relationship. You may end up flying out to New York and going out for drinks, right? That may happen. I got to have dinner with Judy Blume once. Oh my God. It was so cool, right? You can be friends with Judy Blume. It's okay. She's an author. You can be friends with her. But when it comes to your agents and your editors and your publishers, they are wonderful people who believe in you and believe in your book. Okay. But this is the lesson. This is Party. Party was my first novel. When Party came out in hardcover at Barnes and Noble, oh my gosh. And you can still smell the ink. It's beautiful and it's lovely and it's mine. It's my first book. Yay. And you want to know what Random House calls this? A unit. This is a unit, as in how many units can we shift this month? Publishing traditionally and independently for that matter is a business. Remember, we talked about this almost an hour ago. It's a business. So your relationship to your editor, your agent, all these people is is professional. You can have fun, you can talk and laugh and have a great time, but if you're not making them money, do not expect that relationship to continue. I'm so sorry if that's harsh, but I wish somebody would have told me. And I'm making it my mission in life to tell apprentice authors this stuff ahead of time so that they know and that they can adjust their expectations accordingly. You can be friendly. I'm not saying be like all, hey, agent. Not saying that. I'm saying it's professional. Okay. If there's any follow-up questions about that, if I'm unclear about that at all, please let me know. But I think that's an important part to that agent and contract negotiation, all that kind of thing. I think it relates to that question. So anyway, all right. Okay, so moving on. Dr. B says you are 100% correct. I don't know about what, but thank you. It's good to be 100% correct every once in a while. Next question. Do your characters resemble people you have known? What are the advantages or disadvantages to that? Excellent question. Yes, less so now than they used to. When I first started, I love telling this story. So Party is 11 chapters long, and every chapter is told from a different character's point of view, which is a really fun way to tell a story. And it was kind of a pastiche. I was basically daring myself to write a book wherein I was taking pieces of other stuff I had written and squishing them together to see if I could make a cohesive story. And it turns out I could. So that was cool. One of the chapters is actually originally going to be a horror story before it got into Party. So won't tell you which one though. And so in the writing of that and in the revision of it, I used my friends as placeholders because a lot of them were kind of in the book in some way, shape, or form. And one of them was my friend Matt. Matt, in order to tell a story with so many points of view, you really have to be specific about your voice. You have to differentiate the characters really, really well as best you possibly can. And so I got to Matt, my placeholder name, and I was like, what makes Matt different? Oh, you know what it is? Matt has this weird verbal tick where he will make a declarative sentence, but then end the sentence with, I mean. And so he would say things like, yeah, I saw the movie last night. It was really good. I mean, and that was it. That was a complete sentence. And I was like, you mean what? Like, what's the, it just always cracked me up. So I used that in the book. because I thought it was a great way to delineate that character from the other characters. And we went through the whole publishing process, and for some terrible reason, I changed everybody else's name except Matt's. I forgot to change Matt's name in the book. And then I realized that after like our launch party at Changing Hands that night, and I'm like, oh, that's still Matt. Oh, and so he comes up to the table like, hey, Matt, what'd you think of the book? And he goes, it was really good. And that was it. And he never said, I mean, again. So sorry, I just love telling that story because it cracks me up. Yes, I definitely use people I've known and continue to know, and that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't use their names, generally speaking. But the thing to remember about that when you use quote unquote real people is that you cannot, and I see this in much younger, right? Like much younger writers, which is okay. It's how you're learning. It's fine. But trying to force the character in the book be exactly like the real person, or the event in real life be like the event that you're capturing in the book to be exactly like it happened in real life. Once people find out you're a writer, they inevitably come up to you and say, oh, I've got a story you should publish. And every single time any author will tell you this, we're like, yeah, no, we won't say it, but we're thinking it, like, that's not a good story. Because while real life is fun and funny and scary and all these things and can be the basis for stories, capturing it exactly as it happened, number one, is almost impossible. Number two, may not be in service to the larger story. If in my, like if I want to include a scene like I do in, like, for example, Manic Pixie Dream Girl, that was something that happened to me and my friends. Well, that's cool. And I'm going to write it maybe like it happened, but then later in the revision realize I can't have, Tyler, my main character, say this phrase or do this thing because that messes up the rest of the book. So I'm going to change it because that's what's best for the story. Do not force real things into your fiction. You have to be guided by the story. You must do what is best for the story every single time. So are there advantages and disadvantages to that? Yeah, I just told you one disadvantage if you're dumb enough not to change the name. But disadvantages, no, I have not encountered any other than that. If you try to make it like this is what really happened, if that's what you want to do, then you need to write a memoir, which is not the same thing. Memoir isn't fiction. It can be creative, but it's not fiction, right? So that's what I think that's how I'd answer that. I hope that answers your question. How do you break into traditional publishing? The same thing. It hasn't changed in years. It's really quite simple. It just isn't easy. You write a novel, complete it, revise it, edit it, all that kind of stuff, make it the best you possibly can. You write a query letter, which is a one-page, write it on like a Word document with 1-inch margins, 12-point New Times Roman font, single-spaced, with a double space in between the paragraphs. You talk about this is the main character, this is what they want, this is how they're going to get it, this is what's at stake, this is what is in the way, and then you don't answer whether they get it or not. And then at the end you say, I'm seeking representation for my 70,000 word romance novel, Gothic Rainbow. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing from you. You cut and paste that into the email that's addressed to a literary agent who represents your genre. You send it off, you repeat that process about 50 to 100 times, and then you wait. Except you don't really wait. You get started writing the next book, not the next book in a series. Write another book. Write another book that's like genre adjacent. If this one was, historical romance, maybe this one's Regency romance or something like that, right? If this was hard sci-fi, maybe the next one is like space opera or something like that. Find something that's close to your genre, but not necessarily the same thing, because I've seen this happen and it's happened to me. The worst feeling in the world is after getting a string of rejections from agents, which you will get, that's normal. You get one agent who says, yeah, I'm not interested, but I really like your voice. What else do you got? And you're like, nothing. I spent 20 years on this book and I didn't get busy writing a second book. Or even worse, nothing. I spent 20 years writing my 10-book series, expecting to sell all 10 books, and now I can't. So I am a huge proponent of not trying to write a series right now. Write book one, complete the arc of book one, leave a couple threads loose to continue on with book two, book three. But if your goal is traditional publishing, then do not waste your time writing an entire series. Please, please, God, don't waste your time doing that. Write a new book and keep writing new books until one of them lands. So that's the short answer. How do you do it? The more difficult answer is sometimes it takes a long time. You don't know which book is going to land. Very few of my author friends, no one leaps to mind, sold their first book or even necessarily got agent representation for their first book. Most of us, it was book 2, 3, or 4 that kind of was the thing that got us into traditional publishing. So you should expect to do that. Chances of your very first novel getting an agent are extremely low. They're not impossible. It does happen. Will you be the exception? Probably not. That's fine. You just need to emotionally prepare yourself for that, because traditional publishing is a long, hard slog. It really is, even under the best of circumstances. I have been blessed to experience the best of circumstances, and it's still really hard. It's hard emotionally, it's hard mentally, it's hard financially. That doesn't mean you shouldn't. Again, let's go back to our coffee talk. If that's what you want, then go get it. But anyway, that's how it's done. I would point you also to some other resources in addition to absolutewrite.com, and just kind of diving into that website. I would go to look up manuscriptwishlist.com, I think it is. That's a great place to start looking for agents and editors and see what people are looking for. I still kind of recommend a site called agentquery.com, Query, agentquery.com as a great resource to start looking for agents. In my experience recently, that's a little bit out of date, but might still be useful. You absolutely must only query agents who represent your genres. If you write Westerns, don't query the romance agent. Okay. This isn't something you can just shotgun a bunch of queries out and hope that somebody picks it up. You need to target your queries. You need to know who they've represented. Even better, read those books if you haven't already. Understand your genre. Do you know the tropes of this genre that readers are going to expect? Are you reading in that? If you've spent your whole life writing science fiction, and then you read an article about how people are making money on Kindle or whatever, writing romance, like, I can do that. No, you probably can't. You honestly probably can't. I've seen people try. Not at first. You could learn, but it's going to take you a couple of years, so you absolutely need to read in your genre to understand what's happening in the market. If you have the resources, you might subscribe to something like Publishers Marketplace and get a sense of what's being sold and start seeing who some of the names are and that kind of thing. And then the other last piece of that I will tell you is be cool. Be professional in all of your dealings. Every once in a while, some idiot will send a query to an agent, and the agent will say, no, thank you, this isn't for me, which is their job. That's what they're paid to do. And then we'll take to Twitter or something, and then, blast this agent and agency and tell them how stupid they are and whatever. And if you think every other agent on earth didn't know about it, they do. And if you think they won't remember that guy, they will. You have to be professional. You're going to get rejected. It's fine. You get a rejection, say, cool, thanks for your time, and you move on. No worries. Be cool. Best thing I can say. So I hope that's a super, super short version of how to do it. Yeah, that's kind of the short version. So I hope that helps. Next question. What if you have a unique concept idea for packaging the book itself, but want to do traditional publishing? Would an agent cover that, and would you have any say if you're publishing traditionally? Do you get a say in possible inclusions within the book or the cover art? Lots of questions in there. So, and I'll tell you what I know. Number one, where's Party? Okay, so when I sold Party to Random House, which was very cool, and it was a great deal, super super awesome thing that kickstarted my whole career. They did ask me about the cover. Like, what are you thinking about for covers, Tom? Do you have any input that you want to give us about covers? And I was like, God, I'm not an artist. I'm not a visual artist of any kind. I'm certainly not a graphic designer. I don't know anything about this. You're Random House. Surely you know better than I do. So I don't know. You do what you want. But since you've asked, the one thing that really bugs me is when I go to a bookstore and it's like a photo of someone's actual face. It's that like takes away from my freedom to kind of imagine what the character looks like. So that's really kind of my only thing that I would ask. And this is what they came back with. So the moral of the story is you may get asked for input, you may not. If you are asked for input, it may not matter. Do you get to make any demands? Probably not. Could you ask your agent to make demands? Probably not. They would most likely try to talk you off that cliff, for multiple reasons. Now, I've also been in scenarios that I won't name, where I have seen book covers where I was like, no, absolutely effing no, not that cover. It hasn't happened a lot, but there's one case in particular that I can recall. It's like, yeah, we're not doing that at all. And so there's some wiggle room to a certain degree, particularly, again, if you're agented and you're working with a traditional publisher and all that, there's some wiggle room with that, but not a whole lot. Now, as far as the packaging goes, that depends. I can't speak authoritatively to that. If you do, here, let me back up. The packaging, unless we're talking about what I would call a gift book, like a book that has a very specific sort of gimmick, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but like, some a joke book or something, the Very Hungry Caterpillar. Okay, you can't have the Very Hungry Caterpillar without the holes, right? That's the whole thing that makes it the Very Hungry Caterpillar. So that is the kind of thing that maybe you'd want to talk about with your agent. However, the thing about the Very Hungry Caterpillar is it's a good book without the holes still. It's still a good book, right? So you need to be able to present an awesome book. This is a thing, again, a lot of apprentice authors don't understand is they are looking for great stories. They are looking for great books. Are there sometimes gimmicks, again, not in a negative way, packaging ideas, things like that, that can go particularly into like children's books and things like that, or certain coffee table books, maybe gift books? Sure, that's fine, but that's slightly different. Either way, the gimmick won't probably statistically be enough to carry the day. What you need is a great story targeted to the right agents who can then get it to the right editors, with whom you can then say, okay, now that we're here, one image I had in mind for this book was it's about this caterpillar, but every page has a little hole in it as he eats his way through the food. What do you think? And the publisher might go, that's a great idea, love it. Or they might say, yeah, no, it'll never fly, and you'll never know. That's something you have to decide your comfort level, and that takes us right back to the whole, do I go independent or do I go traditional? Is that a book you could craft yourself through a Kickstarter? If you have a very, very specific idea, like I want my book to be all parchment pages and it has to have a leather cover and it's going to come to the reader wrapped in brown paper and a leather strap, and maybe and it has a lock and a key on it, and it's going to be a premium item that's going to retail for 50, 60, $100. Dude, that sounds like a Kickstarter project. And that's something you can do yourself, and you can outsource all that stuff yourself and still make money. That's what I would go. That's where I would go in that case. That may not be what you're talking about. You might just have like a cover in mind or something like that, which is different. But by and large, you absolutely 100% have the freedom to tell your agent and tell your editor, hey, I had this idea. Here's what I'd love to see. Just be aware that the editor or the publisher may very well say, yeah, that's not going to work, and hopefully explain to you why. That's all marketing stuff. But yeah, that's kind of what I would say. I hope that answers your question. I hope that's in the ballpark. So anyhow, so that brings us to, that was all of our questions. If you have any more, go ahead and feel free to throw those in. But let me run over, I think, to Wendy or Emily and see what you guys would like to do next while I take some water. My goodness, you guys are awesome. This was fun. I hope you enjoyed this. I just go and go and go. We got this. Are you still with us, Wendy? I don't know. Maybe you're not. You're here somewhere, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I put a
Oh,
note
great.
in the chat. How did you come to be a writer? What was your path to get here?
Oh, sure. Great question. So I in in second grade, we had the mean teacher. Like every school has the mean teacher, and I had her. Scared me to death. And we had an assignment to write a short story. And when I say a short story in second grade, it was, one piece of paper, kind of double spaced, big letters, But I wrote my story and had a great time. And then she called me up to her desk. So I thought I was in trouble. And she goes, Tommy, I want you to take this home and rewrite it and make it longer. And then tomorrow morning, you're going to read it to the first graders. And I was like, I'm being punished. What did I do? How did I make her so mad at me? Like, clearly I've done something wrong, but I did it because she was scary. And I, I rewrote it, made it longer. I think it was about, I'm pretty sure it was about giant black widows climbing over Camelback Mountain. So sweet dreams. And I went next door and I stood up in front of these first graders, and because everybody loves public speaking, right? Particularly if you're like 8 or 9 years old. So I'm up there just terrified. And then I looked up and I saw, 30 first graders like they couldn't wait to hear what was going to happen. They were just so jazzed that someone was going to read them a story. And it's no joke. At that moment, at that age, I was like, cool, got this. And from that moment forward, I knew I wanted to tell stories, and I knew I wanted to be up in front of people. And I've been doing that in one way, shape, or form ever since. Started with theater in 8th grade, which I then did for the next 22 years as an actor and director. And then I was always writing during that time, but I wasn't taking it too seriously. Like I was writing stuff and just giving it to friends or whatever, because I just liked it. I just liked writing and telling stories. Um, Emily mentioned public access. We made a movie for Dimension Cable. Those of you who are old enough to remember that, it was terrible. It was a terrible movie, but we did it. We made it, and I will never regret making it. And then many, many years later, while I was still doing theater, I was in a terrible job. You've all had one. And if you haven't, you will. I was in a terrible job, and I was like, what do you want to do, bro? Like, this is just, what do you want to do? And that's where I first realized, like, I want to publish a book. That would be great. I've got all these stories that I've told and never tried to publish them. I'm going to try to do that. And then I started first by writing short stories and sending them out primarily to internet sites, various internet publishers and online magazines and things like that. And after I had sold about 10 short stories, I was like, okay, I don't suck. Like 10 different editors now have said, yes, I like your stuff well enough to represent it on my website. So that's a good start. Now let's try the next step and see about getting an agent. So then I started that process. And happened to, luckily, I found a young agent who had just gotten her job, and she was actively looking for clients, and she liked my book. And we didn't end up selling that version of that book, but then, and then she quit her job, and it was this whole awful thing that happened. But then the next agent picked me up and sold Party. And so that whole odyssey there was 3 years, 4 years, I think, not counting the writing that I did for 20 years prior to that. So that's kind of the short version. And then I've been writing and publishing in one way, shape, or form ever since. And just lately, and the other thing about that is that does open up some other doors that you may not even know exist. For example, writing for Spawn. Where'd it go? Spawn, there he is. Which is a great job, one of the best jobs I've ever had. And that happened not because I was a published author, but because I was a published author, I met people who worked, at Phoenix Comic-Con, which what it was called back in the day, who happened to know this person, who was the person who knew Todd McFarlane, who just happened to overhear him say, I'm looking for somebody who doesn't write comic books. Oh, have you met Tom Leveen? Like, crazy things like that just happen sort of naturally when you have your foot in that door, which is great. And I keep an eye out for those kinds of opportunities. But yeah, I've just been writing nonstop, and I usually have, like right now, I can tell you, let's see, on my list of things to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 projects right now. All of them various. Some of them I got urban fantasy. I've got some horror comic book stuff that I'm working on. I've got a YA comic. Where'd she go? Oh, there. Oh, I covered it. That's why. Beckett's Last Mixtape up here. That's a Kickstarter thing that I did. Issue 2 will be on Kickstarter. So yeah, I keep a lot of irons and a lot of fires because I am a storyteller and I can't not do this, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's how I would answer that. Okay, I see Emily, not Emily, Wendy's in the chat. An excerpt from one of your books. Okay, maybe. So here's a bit of advice before I do that. I'm happy to do that. But when your first book comes out, first of all, you need to go to Changing Hands and the Poison Pen and your local Barnes & Noble and tell them my book's coming out and be all excited. You also need to go to those stores and get to know people and be kind to them and buy books from them. And then you need to go to author events and ask good questions from authors and buy their books so that when you go up to get it signed, you can ask them a follow-up question. Bookstores are part of the publishing world, you guys. Don't forget that. Because I can tell you this right now. The guy who goes into, let's say Changing Hands and is a total jerk to the person behind the counter thinking, well, they're just the cashier, right? And then a year later, his shiny new science fiction book comes out and he's like, I want to do a book launch. And he goes to Changing Hands and says, hey, can I do a book launch here? And they're like, yeah, no, because they will remember. They have long memories. So you want to be friends with your local bookstore. Please, please, please go to Changing Hands, go to Poison Pen, go to your local Barnes & Noble and get to know the people who work there, and start relationships with them, bring them something. But when you do that and when you do your big book launch, my recommendation is to not do a reading, or at least keep it very, very short, because I have trained in theater. I've gone, I have 5 sessions of actor training at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and I don't do readings because they are hard to do really well. So keep them short, keep them brief, give people just enough of a little taste, get some excitement going, and then talk about your book and your work, do your artist talk, so to speak. But anyway, so that's some advice on that. What was I gonna do? Okay, you know what? I don't know. Do we have, Wendy, do we happen to know, this is a terrible question to ask. Do we happen to know kind of the rough age ranges of people we've got today, or do we have no idea whatsoever?
We do have some younger kids.
How
So
young?
I would keep it PG.
PG.
Yeah.
Dr. B, do I have any PG? I'm trying to think if I do. Let me think,
And
let me
you
think.
don't have to read us a lot. I wanted the audience to get a
Oh,
sense of how you write, and you don't have to go into
oh,
too
okay,
much
no, this is a
detail
good
if you
one.
don't want
Okay.
to.
Nope, I've got one. I was going to do Beckett. Beckett might be too much. I'm going to do Morrigan instead, because Morrigan, this is from chapter 2 of Party. And Morrigan is to this day one of my all-time favorite characters, because she's just so. Dr. B says, when their parent gets eaten and sick. I'm not going to read where the parent gets eaten and sick, although it is a lot of fun. Yeah, Morgan is one of my favorite all-time characters that I've ever created, because she's so just sassy and blunt and like just doesn't care what anybody thinks and has such an attitude about the world. And I'm like, that's my girl. So yeah, I think I'll just read a quick bit. Okay, so this is Morgan, chapter 2 of Party, and it goes something like this. Tonight is the biggest party of the year, and if my dad doesn't stop yelling, I'm going to miss it. This is so stupid. What happened was I just got my first car late last week for my 16th birthday, an old powder blue Super Beetle my dad got from some car dealer friend of his. I had my license, but only by a matter of days. I was still sort of learning to drive the Beetle because it's a stick, but I'd obviously passed the test to get the license in the first place, right? So I told my mom I was going to this party, and she gave me 20 bucks for food. And Ashley and I spent all day talking on the phone about what we are going to wear, who was going to be there, and the usual stuff. And what I told my mom was we were, and I quote, going to this party. No big deal, right? I guess what I should have said is I'm driving to this party in my old new car. My mistake, because about 20 minutes ago, I walked in the living room. There was a baseball game on. There's always a game on of some sort. And I stood in the doorway and I said, and I quote, I'm going to drive over to Ashley's now, who lives like 3 miles away. My mother, deeply into her daily crossword puzzle, said, uh-huh. My father said, which is not unusual for either one of them, unless I have spontaneously burst into flame, which only happened that one time. Just kidding. I blend into the beige walls of my house as far as they are concerned. Keep those grades up are my only rules as far as I know. Outside of that, I do what I want, which is cool for the most part. Anyway, I'll stop there. That's just a bit of voice that I tend to do. I love writing about students who are maybe not maybe a little bit more on the fringe. That's where I come from. That's where my friends come from. And I enjoy telling and re-examining some of those stories. And while Morrigan, to go back to our early discussion, is not necessarily based on any one person, she's kind of a composite of several people, but she's definitely a shout out to some people that I knew in high school and still know today. So anyway, so that was Morrigan. Next question is, what advice do you have for young people who are interested in writing? Any advice, tips, or writing exercises you would recommend? Absolutely. I'll throw a couple of these out, some exercises, because I know we meant to do that earlier. So let me throw out a couple. We won't go into them in detail and like stop and do them because silence drives me crazy. But here are some exercises you can do. The first one I got from my good friend Cecil Castellucci. If you have not read Cecil's books, you really should. Boy Proof is my favorite, but Cecil is fantastic. And she taught me this exercise. It is 5 things every protagonist has, okay? A superpower, a secret place, something they love, a weakness, and an adversary or opponent or an opposing force of some kind. You can apply this to a good protagonist anyway. You can fill this in for everybody. And it's fun to play with some options. Like, let's take Superman. One of Superman's powers, I don't know, flight. Cool. All right. Secret place. Does anybody remember the name of Superman's secret place? Dun, dun, dun. It is the Fortress of Solitude, of course. Something they love. Lois Lane. Great. A weakness. Kryptonite. Easy. And an opponent or an opposing force, an adversary. There's a bunch of them. Let's go with Lex Luthor. Cool. Can you replace some of those? Absolutely. Something Superman loves. Lois Lane. A weakness. Lois Lane. Right? Fun. You can do this for Katniss. What is Katniss's superpower? Probably her bow and arrow. Secret place. There's a place she goes in the woods to do her hunting. Something she loves, a weakness, an opponent or opposing force, right? You can fill this out for every protagonist you ever read about. Really great way to organize an English paper, by the way. And you can write it for your own protagonist. So that's one exercise you can do. And it's fun to just kind of play fill in the blank with that and change it up a little bit and see what you come up with. Then let's see, that's not really an exercise, but let me see. No, we already did that. Something to be thinking about. It's not an exercise, but just something to kind of contemplate, particularly if you're somebody who wants to go into traditional publishing, is the first fives. And that is the following: the first 5 words, the first 5 sentences, the first 5 paragraphs, and the first 5 pages. If you're interested in traditional, if you can get an agent that you're querying to get to page 5 or 10 of your novel, you're in really good shape, because I guarantee you most agents are not going to get past page 1 because they are inundated with hundreds and hundreds of queries weekly, and they can look at page 1 and go, nope, 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 oh maybe, and keep turning pages. You want to be the person that they keep turning pages. So make those first 5s the best you can. Make sure something is happening. The other thing to consider, because I don't think we talked about this earlier, is to give your protagonist agency. Agency is your ability or your character's ability to affect the world around them. They make choices. Here's an example. I'm assuming you have either read or seen the Hunger Games, or you're at least sort of culturally familiar with the Hunger Games, okay? So imagine the lottery in the district with Katniss, and they pull out Prim's name, and Katniss goes, oh, man, that's terrible. Poor Prim, she's totally gonna get killed. Love ya, mean it. You know, do you want to read that book? Do you want to see that movie? Because I don't, and you probably don't either. Or do you want to read the book and see the movie where as soon as they say Prim, Katniss goes, I volunteer as tribute immediately. That's agency. She takes action to impact the world around her. It's one of the biggest things I see missing from first drafts, including my own. Always, always, always make sure that main character is trying to do something. My friend Joe Nassis and I just did a whole series about this, where we talk about, okay, your main character is tied to a chair. Okay. And there's physically nothing they can do, right? Well, then how do they show agency, Tom? That doesn't make any sense. They show agency by you, creator of this universe and creator of this protagonist, showing them thinking about, how am I going to get out of this? Am I going to pretend that I'm sick to get the guard, the ninja guard or whatever, to loosen my bonds? Am I going to throw myself backward and try to break the chair? Am I going to just rub my wrists so much that they bleed and I can squeeze out? As long as your character is trying to do something, we will be on board with them. As soon as somebody else swings in or descends from the heavens to save them, we're out. We will check out every single time. You've probably seen that movie and you've probably seen that book, and it's so disappointing, right? So that, regardless of your age, if you can learn that now, you will be so far ahead of people who don't understand that concept. So anyway, hope that answers the question, Wendy. Any advice for writing exercises? That's a cool one. Gosh, I could think of 1,000 if I wasn't on the spot right now, but anyway, we'll go with those. We'll go with those. Emily, what kinds of scenes from your novels brought you tremendous joy or presented a challenge while writing? What made it a joy? How did you overcome the challenges? Emily, bringing it. So there's probably a scene in every one of my books that brings me joy. A lot of writers, I was just in a mastermind Zoom call the other night where we were talking about this. A lot of us, and probably a lot of you, have a one scene that you're just like, I cannot wait to get to this scene. This is the scene I want to share with everybody, right? And you will literally write a book or a story around getting to that scene. One of my a creator was talking and she said, yeah, I imagine my friend Amy in a mecha suit. And so I wrote a comic book to get her into a mecha suit. That was the whole point. And that's fine. That's totally okay. So I will tell you, Emily, that there is at least one, if not multiple scenes in every single one of my novels that I was trying to get to because it brought me great joy. One, God, just even looking, like one that comes to mind is in Zero, when the band in Zero, Zero set in Phoenix in the early 90s, and the main character Zero is dating this guy who's an up and coming band, and the band gets its big break at the end. And I'm so proud of how I captured the energy of a live show. Yeah, I still to this day love that scene. I love the end of Hell World. If you haven't read Hell World, I can't give it away. It will not end the way most people will expect it to end. I will give you that much. And I'll tell you, Emily, I wrote that novel to get to the last line of the book. I knew the last line of the book before most of the story. And I wrote most of that. I wouldn't say wrote, I revised most of the story to get to that ending, because the ending is the theme of the entire novel. So go get Hell World, but don't skip to the end. You'll ruin it. Promise me you won't skip to the end. And then challenges, yeah, there have been a couple pieces. We talked earlier about, Dr. B asked about whether or not I base characters off of real people. Yes, like base, but don't adhere to, not slavishly. Likewise, are there real life events that I will take and put into fiction? Yes, there are. Again, I modify them for the purposes of the story. So they're not cut and paste. This is what happened in life. This is what happens in the book. Rarely. There's one glaring exception to that, maybe two, that I'm not sure I want to talk about or not, but there's one exception to that where something that literally happened to me, I basically cut and pasted from life, almost from a journal entry, into a book. And it was not a good thing. It was a bad thing that happened, but I put it in there because it resonated so deeply with me. It's also a story that I share with other people quite frequently at like school visits and stuff like that, and it seems to have some resonance. And that was tough. Like I still made the necessary changes to make it fit the book, but otherwise the dialogue is almost word for word, and that was rough, man. But it was also good. It was good to get it out and turn this bad scenario into something useful, because it's one of those scenes in the book where a lot of particularly younger readers will be like, yes, oh my God, yes, my dad too, or whatever. So even those challenging ones also bring joy. And in terms of how did I overcome them? I think by, number one, understanding that if somebody else might need to read it. I think we opened today's discussion with that. Somebody somewhere needs to hear your story, right? So Seth Godin, Godin, Seth Godin, who's a marketing guru of sorts, has a great thing about when you create something, party, sick, whatever, your stance, your attitude should be here. I made this for you. This is for you. And as writers, as creatives, that should 100% be where we're coming from all the time. All the time. Even if your goal is, I want to make $1 million, good for you. But you should still have that soul of, here, I made this for you. I hope this brings you joy, you know? So in some of those challenging sequences, Mercy Rule, now that I'm looking at the cover, there's a couple scenes in Mercy Rule, man. They will tear out your heart. One of the things that I say about Mercy Rule and some of my other work is you'll smile, but not until the end. I will take you and these characters through hell to get there. I always have hope, though. Laurie Haltz Anderson, who you should absolutely become familiar with if you're not already, once said at an author event, it is immoral to not include hope in books for young people. And that was 10 or 15 years ago, she said that to me, and I've never forgotten it. And I absolutely, that is, practically cut and pasted at the top of my computer when I write. If you're writing for younger people, it is our duty to bring hope into that story in some way, shape, or form. Absolutely. Now, you want to go Stephen King, you want to do adult fiction and have things end badly, tear it up. If you're writing for young people, I don't think we have that luxury. It's immoral, as Laurie said. So anyway, I hope that answered your question, Emily. Cool. What's next? What do we got? Oh, wait, there's a question here. Let me see if that's anything. Oh, how would you draft a query email? Okay, so really quickly, dear agent, drop down a space. Don't say agent, put their name. Sorry. Make sure you have the agent's name and spell it properly. Dear Stephanie, skip a space down. Tell me in 3 to 5 sentences about your protagonist. You're using third person present tense. Okay. Tell me about the protagonist. This is a story about Joe. And Joe is a demon slayer who has been raised since birth to go hunt evil. That's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 is, then one day. I don't recommend you say it quite that literally, but in your head, be thinking about then one day, because that's where the story really begins. Then one day, Joe gets a message in the mail saying, I know the truth, you're a real demon. Perplexed by this, Joe embarks on a quick adventure to track down the sender of this letter. Paragraph 3, now something's going wrong. And you're just building it step by step. So here's my character, a little bit of background, keep it short, but compelling and vivid, use detail. Here's what they want. I want to go find out who turned my daughter into a vampire. I don't know, whatever, it's your story. Here's what's in my way. Here's what's in their way. Here's what's at stake if I win or lose. And then do not answer whether they win or lose. You got to leave that little cliffhanger. Try to avoid ending your query on a question. Will Joe successfully find out who turned his daughter into a vampire? Find out, but don't do that. End it with a period. And then your last paragraph is, I'm seeking representation for my 80,000 word young adult fantasy, Vampires in Phoenix. Thank you very much. Hope to hear from you. That's the basic outline. Yeah, for sure. Oh, Emily's just writing that. Yeah. So I hope that's, again, that's a very short kind of answer. But that's basically the way you want to do it. They are really hard. Query letters are super hard to do, which is why I definitely recommend finding a group of people, again, perhaps on Absolute Right, or you can, if you're on Facebook, you can look for Facebook groups that might do it, but get some people who are familiar with query writing to start bouncing that kind of stuff off of, because it's a nightmare. Writing a book is easy, by the way. If you write 250 words a day on average, you will have a 90,000 word novel in a year. That's nothing. That's one double-spaced Word document per day. That's nothing. I guarantee you can write a book. A query letter can take weeks and sometimes months to try and get right. They are painful. They're terrible. And yet we must still do them. So anyhow, yeah, hope that answers your question. Ooh, all right, I'm gonna take some more water. What's next? Can I have you discuss writer's block? and how to cope with that kind of barrier. You absolutely can. Writer's block doesn't exist, right? Okay, let me explain what I mean by that. Yes, it's true that sometimes you can sit down to write, particularly if you're a pantser, and go, I just, it's not coming, it's not happening, right? That's totally okay. It happens to me. There's this whole thing about you have to write every day and whatever. The reality is, if you can write every day, that's good. You should I try to write every day? Absolutely. Is it good to be on a schedule? I think so. I have discovered, now I used to write late at night before I had kids. I would stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning and I would write for hours and it was great. I can't do that anymore. So now, believe it or not, I get up at 4:30 in the morning and I promise myself to write for just 10 minutes. Just get 10 minutes. I don't even do word count. Just 10 minutes. It doesn't matter what the project is, just get something down. But having a set schedule can really, really help protect against writer's block, because there's something about, here's my space, okay, and here's my chair, and here's what the sun looks like and everything, and your brain very soon starts to go, oh, it must be writing time, and will kick in for you. So a schedule can be very helpful. A habit of writing at a particular time, particular place can be very helpful. Oddly enough, the flip side to that is if you're really stuck and nothing's happening, then go somewhere else. Take your laptop to Starbucks, go to the park, bring your pad and your paper to the kitchen if that's as far as you can go. Bring it to school, use it on the playground, go for a walk, do whatever. Try again, use your famous little device here to do a speech to text. Go for a walk and just narrate stuff, right? Those things can very quickly break those log jams that happen. Plotting, if you use an outline, that can help you because you should have the whole thing written down. And now you can say, you know what, I don't feel like writing chapter 28, so I'm going to write chapter 33 today. You can, because you've got an outline. That's one of the advantages of using an outline, right? Now, I said a minute ago, there's no such thing as writer's block, right? What I meant by that is if you intend to be a professional writer, if this is something you want to do for a living or even half a living or whatever, you don't get the luxury of writer's block. You may have project block, but by the time you get that first book out, because here's what happens in traditional, for example, yay, party came out, I wrote my book, period. Notice there's no plural, book, period, because I spent my whole life writing this book, period. And then 2 weeks later, your editor says, cool, when's book 2 coming out? And you're like, oh, and that becomes the norm. Now you're on the hook for the next book, the next thing in the novel, next thing in a series, or a new novel or whatever. So once you kind of cross into, I'm now a professional writer, you don't have the luxury of writer's block. And you frequently, like I do, have at least 2, if not more projects kind of going at any one time, because you don't know which one's going to kind of catch fire next. But I think that's a good thing because, you know what, I just can't work on party today. My mind's not there. I'm going to work on Hell World because I'm in that kind of mood. Having multiple projects can be a good way to do that. Now, having said all that, if you're just locked up, I mean, there's just nothing happening, then I think it's time to look at what else is going on in your life, because this is something else I'm glad we can talk about briefly, is apprentice authors tend to feel like they are authors in this little silo, okay? Then there's students, moms, dads, children, dog walkers, martial artists, gamers, that they're siloing, right? Each individual aspect of their life. Folks, it doesn't work that way. You're a storyteller 24/7. That's why I said you need to get out of your house. You need to get out and experience things, right? You are never not taking in stimulus, colors, smells, textures, scents, stories, ideas, things like that. It doesn't turn off. Writing fiction is a holistic lifestyle choice. You're doing it forever. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? And you deserve to, again, let me remind you, you deserve to do all of this. You deserve an hour a week if that's all you have to tell your story. So please get that hour a week or 20 minutes a day or whatever it is that you can schedule and protect it jealously. Don't let anybody interfere with that writing time. Anyway, yeah, I just want to make sure I said that. That has nothing to do with writer's block, except for the fact that, yeah, we don't have the luxury kind of doing that. But if you're a storyteller, that shouldn't be a problem. Now, to be a little bit more practical and a little less snarky about it, one of the things I like to do is I'll take two protagonists and lock them in a room together and see what happens. I did that with Zero and a space pirate. I locked them in a room together, and while I'm not going to publish what I wrote because it wouldn't make any sense, I learned a ton about Zero from the perspective of the space pirate. It was amazing. So yeah, put different characters into different situations, change your setting. If you've got an argument that happens in the kitchen and it's not working for you, take that argument and put it on while riding donkeys down the Grand Canyon. I don't know why, it's your story, but give that a try. Put the scene in different settings and see what changes. That can very frequently kind of break up a logjam. And then somebody said famously, and I can't remember who it was, said, if all else fails, two guys kick in the door with guns, and you just go from there. Just introduce something crazy. Just remember, no word is wasted. Even if you do an exercise or a prompt to get yourself writing again, that's fine. It may never see the light of day. That's totally okay. You're just worried about ultimately getting a finished product out. And remember that you have to finish the book. That's probably the number one reason your book will not be a bestseller is you didn't finish it. Like, that's it. What does the writing process look like? And how long does it take to complete your books? Ooh, how many drafts and scrapped ideas do you go through before publishing? So many, but it varies. Zero, where'd Zero go? Where'd she go? She's over here somewhere. Second book that came out. I wrote the first draft of Zero, what became Zero rather, in my first year of college. It landed on bookshelves 19 years later. Now, that doesn't mean I spent every day for 19 years writing it. That's not what happened at all. There were years where I didn't do any work, but I did do work in between those years. I was still pecking away at it here and there and rewriting it and scrapping it and rewriting this. Now I'm doing, originally this book was third person, multiple perspective. By the time it landed in this form, it became first person, single perspective. So it went through multiple iterations versus something like Hell World. Oh no, Hell World went through a bunch. Mercy Rule went through virtually none. Mercy Rule came out almost as a whole thing. We did a lot of work on it to get it into shape, because that's another multiple point of view story. We did a lot of work on that to get it shaped. But in terms of what I first brought to my agent, it was in its basic final form when I gave it to her, as I recall. So it really depends on the story. I do think learning how to write fast and write clean is a good skill to learn, though. That's something I've developed the last 12 years or so. And I get comments from editors pretty consistent, like, you turn in really clean manuscripts. I'm like, good, thank you. Because I'm on to the next thing. That's why. But for now, if you're not under contract somewhere, if you don't have a deadline, you do you, whatever it takes, again, because I don't want to be prescriptive with a question like that. I don't want to tell you, here's how you have to do it. You do it your way, whatever works for you, but do give it the care and consideration that it deserves. I guess I would say that, if that helps. So if I didn't answer your question, Emily, please let me know. Do you recommend NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month? Totally. I've tried NaNoWriMo 4 or 5 times and only finished once, but one of the times I didn't finish was the book that ended up being Hell World. So you can absolutely write, you can write a draft of a publishable work during NaNoWriMo. If you're not familiar with NaNoWriMo, just Google National Novel Writing Month. It's every November. There are no prizes. You just do it for yourself. Your goal is to write, I believe it's 50,000 words in the month of November. And it's a great way to do what we've been talking about, which is sit down. One of my author friends calls it butt in chair. That's BIC, butt in chair. That's how you write books. So NaNoWriMo is a great, great way to get in the habit of writing a book. And then if you can carry it out through past November, great. But it's great for community building. There's so many resources around the Valley and online. Writers groups form up a lot during NaNoWriMo, and some of those continue on for years. Great way to meet people who are where you are, who you can commiserate with, who you can bounce ideas off of. So even just the writing of the book, the 50,000 words, itself is great, but there's also, it's become such a big thing that you can find all kinds of other resources by being a part of it. So yes, I absolutely recommend doing it. Oh shoot, I was gonna, oh, the thing to remember, this poor agents hate December, because December 1st, December 5th, inevitably, they get deluged with NaNoWriMo novels, because people think, well, I wrote a book, it's done, I can just send it in. No, you can't. No, you can't. First drafts suck. They're supposed to suck. That's their purpose. Let them suck. It's okay. Most of the writing classes that I teach are about the revision process, not about the writing process. Because again, 250 words a day, you got a book, easy day, right? Crafting a novel to where it is suitable for an agent to take to a publisher, that's where the writers are made. That's where the work happens. Okay, so that is my only caveat to NaNoWriMo. Please, 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 absolutely encourage you to do it. Clear off time for your schedule in November to do it. It's a great experience, but do not then just shove it in an email and send it off to a bunch of publishers. Just don't. It's all about the revision. It's all about the revision. Yeah. What else? Q&A. Is there a market for books that have gimmicks, like a novel written in text and other media? I'm going to say that it's the wrong question, I think. So I would say, I'm going to rephrase your question and first say, is there space for books that have a novel written in texts or other media? Absolutely. Others have already done so. Totally fine. It's the same with, like, can I write a novel in free verse, for example? Absolutely. Ask Ellen Hopkins. Sure, you can. I want to clarify the word market for you, because, because for me, where I come from, market has a very specific meaning and sort of definition. And the way you're phrasing the question makes it sound like, is there a place for it? Is there a group of readers out there, and enough of them, who want to read a book written in text and other media? To that, I will say, I don't know. I sort of doubt it, because they're already doing it. Like, why am I going to go to Changing Hands and buy that book about text messages when I've got this thing? So I could be wrong. Don't quote me. This isn't gospel, but I kind of doubt it. Have other people done it? I'm pretty sure Dr. B might be able to speak to this, if he's still around, better than I can. We certainly have, like in random, I've used Facebook posts and stuff like that. Like, is it becoming part of a fictional lexicon that you can use? Absolutely. Can you write a whole book that way? Probably. But again, the number one rule before we even worry about that, I don't want to say before you worry about it, the number one rule about that question is it a good story? Can you illustrate, using just texts, a character who wants something and is stopping at nothing to get it? I would argue, yes, you can. I would further argue it's probably more difficult to do in just text messages. And just as to clarify that a little bit too, everything should feel life or death to the protagonist. Whether your story is a sweet, sort of fluffy bubblegum YA romance about a boy wanting to ask a girl to the big dance, that boy needs to feel like that's a matter of life or death. And some of you remember, it feels very much like that, just as much as trying to slay the dragon that's destroying the village. Those are both equally weighted in their own contexts, right? So in a book that's going to be, nothing but text messages, my concern would be, can you illustrate that level of want and need and desire on the part of the protagonist? It's possible. It's absolutely possible, but it's a really, that's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough, but don't say that I said no. And don't say that I said not to try it, because I think you should. If that's where you're feeling like you want to go, do it, try it. If the story is good enough, if the story is sound and the storytelling is sound, it will find a place and it will find an audience. Yes. So I hope that answers your question. How do you come up with fresh ideas that nobody thinks about? You don't. Isn't that the worst answer ever? You don't come up with fresh ideas. It's all been done, you guys. It's all been done. Shakespeare himself ripped stories off. He was just retelling stuff that he'd read about. Okay, there aren't any. Yeah, thank you. Oh, it's been done. Okay, he's talking. That's Dr. B. He's talking about the text messages. Um, yeah, there are no new stories. Okay, wait a minute, Tom. But there's however many hundreds and thousands of books published every year. Are you telling me those are all the same stories? Yeah, basically. Let's see. Here's a YA romance about a boy from the wrong side of the tracks who falls in love with this girl, but their parents don't like each other. Have you heard that story before? Yeah. Here's a story about a guy who's royalty and his dad got killed, and so now he has to figure out how he's going to kill his own uncle who took over the throne. Have you heard that story? Yeah. Like, I mean, all of these stories have been told. There are functionally two stories that you need to be thinking about. Man goes on a journey, stranger comes to town. And the only difference between those two stories is the point of view. It's still about the journey. Okay. I apologize. I'm sounding snarky and I don't mean to sound that way. Because the point is, I don't want you to worry about is this a fresh idea? And there's a few out there. Every once in a while, something like, wow, I haven't seen that before kind of comes up. But I would point you to something like The Walking Dead. Okay. Regardless of how you feel about where it is now, let's go back to that first season of Walking Dead. Did The Walking Dead do something different with zombies? No. Like, okay, here's a guy, he's a cop, and there's zombies. The world's over. Okay, has anybody seen that movie? Has anybody read that book before? Because I have many times. I wrote one. Nothing new there. So, but then why did it work? Why did we all watch that first season of The Walking Dead? It was that author's voice. It was that creative team that made it so watchable. I have not yet seen The Last of Us yet. Everybody's talking about it, and I need to figure out a way to see it, but everybody's talking about this story. But I guarantee you, there will be nothing in that story that I have not encountered. There will be nothing in the story you have not encountered. What you haven't encountered, what I haven't encountered, is the way they are doing it. The way they're combining the visual. Now we're talking about film, obviously, but the visuals and the sound and the character and all that kind of stuff. Without even seeing it, without knowing much about what it's about, I guarantee you I will probably love the main characters, because that's what we do. We fall in love with those protagonists and we can't get enough of them. And so we will follow them anywhere. It happened with Katniss. It happened with, what's her name, Bella, back during, Twilight, all those these many years ago. My point being, and again, I apologize for my tone. I'm being really snarky here. My point is, I don't want you to worry about the fresh ideas. What I want you to worry about is telling the story your way. There's only one you. If we do a prompt right now, okay, here's our prompt, everybody. We're going to all write a short story, 500 words, 1,000 words, whatever, about a girl in high school who has a superpower and discovers that the parents of her boyfriend are evil supervillains. Go. Every single one of us, and has that story been told? Absolutely. But if that's our prompt, every single one of us here today is going to tell that story differently. That's the piece I want you to lean into. I want you to tell your version of that story in your voice, because maybe your voice is going to be snarky and sarcastic and kind of lighthearted and fun. Mine's going to be super dark, super serious, lots of blood and guts and gore and whatever, because that's what I like, whatever. And then somebody else is going to be kind of down the middle and split the difference between the two. Somebody else is going to do it in verse or text messages or whatever. So don't worry about fresh ideas. Go out and experience the world. Let ideas come to you. The things that stick in your filter stick for a reason. Trust yourself. Trust your voice. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if I need to clarify that. That would be my advice there. It's a great question. It is a great question, but I think we get apprentice writers get too caught up in that it needs to be new or original. And it's like, dude, have you seen primetime television the last 10 years? There is nothing new out there. Now, we're better writers than they are, but yeah, you might find an interesting setting, a different way of looking at something. I mean, all of these stories, Romeo and Juliet, right, is a gem that you can hold up and look at different facets. Can you tell Romeo and Juliet from Tybalt's point of view, or from the parents' point of view? Or can you set that in a global environmental apocalypse? Can you set it during a zombie apocalypse? Can you set it on a starship? Yes, you can do those things and let those settings impact the basic story, but the basic stories are already out there. And that's a good thing. That's okay. That's nothing to worry about. So I hope I answered that. Let me know if I didn't. That was, yeah. And I hope I didn't. I apologize if I sounded too snarky for any of that. That was not my intent. but good question. You guys are great. I hope you have a great time. Great. Okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Hope that helps. Hope that helps. And I would also, let me see. Some books I recommend. Well, I'm waiting for Wendy to let me know what we're doing next. Highly recommend Stephen King's On Writing. Even if you don't like Stephen King, that's okay. His book is absolutely worth reading. There's an older book now. It's a little outdated, but still worth looking for. Changing Hands probably has a couple copies because I've asked them to carry it. 79, 78. Oh, I probably don't have it out. I think it's 78 Reasons Why Your Book May Never Be Published and 14 Reasons Why It Just Might by Pat Walsh. Again, I don't know if there's a newer edition. It's a little outdated just because time and technology has changed, but it's the fundamentals are still really good. I read that book 3 times, once before getting published and twice after being published, and everything he said was true. So I definitely recommend those. I'm trying to think if there was some other, oh, there is a book. This is a little advanced, but just in case that's what you're looking for, this book will blow your mind. The Bestseller Code, Anatomy of a Blockbuster Novel. This is not a how-to book. These people built a program, a computer program, into which they could feed novels or feed writing, and this program could tell you what the odds were that it was going to be a bestseller. And their success rate was something like 80 or 90%. It's insane. So again, not a how to write a bestseller. And by the way, I would avoid, and if you're on Facebook or Instagram, you see these ads all the time, probably for write a bestseller in 7 days and blah, blah. Don't. Anybody promising you a bestseller or that you can make $1 million writing whatever, it's almost certainly crap. Please don't fall for it. There are legitimate things out there, but those typically are not among them. I just urge great caution when it comes to buying stuff from ads that you see online. Bestseller Code, great book for understanding. This book, this is what I love about this book. This book, and I'm so sorry, will walk you through why 50 Shades of Grey became what it became. And their argument, and this is fascinating. Now, I have not read 50 Shades of Grey. I'm not going to read 50 Shades of Grey. I could care less about 50 Shades of Grey. Doesn't interest me in the least. But it's a curious question. Why did this book, this series take off? This book shows you, like from a clinical scientific point of view, here's why. And they have this graph, right, that says here's where it starts. Here's the first arc, and then the second arc, and the third arc, and the fourth, and it will show you. And then it overlays, I think it compares it to Da Vinci Code or one of these other like runaway bestsellers. And you can lay them over on top of each other and see the exact same beats. It's nuts, right? So, but if you're serious about it, you want to really get into the weeds, that's a great book to kind of go through. It won't, it's not prescriptive, but you can learn a lot about what kinds of books become bestsellers and why. Fascinating stuff. So definitely worth looking into to those resources. So anyway,